So for lab 2, you guys are going to get some experience working with some basic user input as well as print formatting. So we can see that I already have my lab 2 folder with the lab2.c file in it, and that's blank. And I already have my command window open to this file. So I'm going to first set up my standard main function, as well as my standard includes. So the first thing I want to do is, if I'm trying to get a value from the user, I need a place to store that value. Let's say I want to get a floating point number from the user. I could use float or I could use double. For this, I'm going to use double, and then I'll call it user input. To actually get the value from the user, I'm going to use the scanf function. And the scanf function takes a format string as well as a location to store whatever it is scanned out. So for a double, because the data type I'm using is a double, my format is going to be %lf. If I was using a float, I would use %f. If I was using an integer, I would use %d. Every data type has its own format string, and these are really easy to look up. So I'm going to change it back to double. Now the next thing I said I needed was a location to store the user input. In this case, I want to store it in this variable that I just made. But I need to do something before. I can't just pass it in like this, because if I pass a variable in like this, it's giving this function the value of user input. And user input doesn't actually have a value right now. So instead of the value of user input, I need the location of user input so that scanf can put the value into it. So for that, I'm going to put an ampersand out front. And the ampersand gives the location of whatever's in front of it. So here I'm passing the location of user input. Here I would just be passing the value. And because I want to store something, I need to pass in the location. Now let's say I want to immediately print this variable out. Printf. The format string is going to be the same as the scanf. So I have a double here. So the format's still going to be lf. I'll put a new line there. And then I'll give it the value of user input for printf, because I want to print the value of user input. Notice I'm not putting an ampersand out here because I would print the location. In this case, I want the value of user input. So let's go ahead and compile and run this. This is going to be lab2.c-o. I'll call it main. And then I will run main. And we see how the program just stops. Now, this is actually because the program is halted right here. It's waiting for user input. So I can put in a user input, I'll say 1.2, and then as soon as I hit enter, we see the rest of the program runs. So scanf will actually halt your program until the user inputs something. Now, this is not great because we see no output from the program. It looks like the program just halted. So instead of this, what we're going to do first, instead of directly calling the scanf function, we're first going to actually prompt the user. Enter a number. And then notice I'm not doing a new line. And then I'll recompile it and run it again. And we can see it prompts me before it says enter a number, and then I can enter a number here. And because I didn't enter a new line, I can enter it on the same line as the prompt. Now when I hit enter, it does the printf. Now we can see I have a lot of useless zeros coming off the end of this floating point number. Now if I want to truncate that, let's say I want to round it to 2 decimal places. It's really easy. In this print statement, I would do 0.2. And this means that there are going to be 2 spots after the decimal place. So now if I recompile this and run it again, 1.2, we can see I now get 2 spots after the decimal place. Okay, next, let's say I want to use the value that I enter in some kind of math. Let's say I want to square it and then print the square of that number. So what I can do is I can make a new value or a new variable, squared input, and I'll immediately assign it to user input times user input. Now this is assigning the value of user input squared to squared input. And then instead of printing user input here, I can print squared input, recompile it, rerun it, and there we go. So now it's printing 1.2 squared. It's 1.44. Now, this should get you through the lab. A note, some minor differences is instead of using doubles in the lab, you're going to be using integers. So remember, this is not going to be %LF as a format. You're going to use %D as your user input, or sorry, as your format string. And then you're going to be doing a lot more calculations as well as a lot more printing. But that'll be after that lab. And after you complete this lab, you will have to check it off. So make sure that once you're done, you are raising your hand in the Zoom meeting and getting it checked off with either myself or one of the mentors.